asking Kate's dad first, and then the realization that he might actually say no dawned upon me. So I thought if I ask Kate first, then he can't really say no. So I did that way round, and I managed to speak to Mike.
The royal world is buzzing once again, and this time it's bigger than ever. Prince William and Princess Kate have finally spoken out, revealing an emotional name update about their long-rumored fourth baby. After weeks of quiet speculation and heartwarming public moments, the couple has stunned everyone with a revelation that touched millions. The announcement didn't just confirm what many had hoped, it carried a meaning so deep it brought tears to royal fans everywhere. But what makes this name so powerful and personal has left even those closest to the royal couple completely speechless. Stay with us. A secret in the making. The world had never seen anything quite like it. One moment, the royal family seemed to be going about their usual duties. Next, something shifted, something changed. And suddenly, everyone wanted to know what was happening behind the palace walls. It started with small things, tiny moments that most people would have missed. But not the cameras, not the reporters who had spent years watching every breath the royals took. Kate appeared at a charity event wearing a dress that sparkled under the lights. Her smile seemed brighter than usual. Warmer. There was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a kind of secret joy that she couldn't quite hide. William stood beside her, and that's when people really started to notice. The Duke of Cambridge had always been proper, always controlled. But now he seemed different, softer. In interviews, his voice carried a gentleness that made people lean forward in their seats. He touched Kate's arm more often. He looked at her like she was the only person in the room. The media went absolutely wild. News channels couldn't stop talking about it. Royal experts appeared on television every hour, analyzing every tiny detail. What did that smile mean? Why did William seem so protective? Was something about to happen? Social media exploded with theories. Fans from around the world shared their thoughts, their hopes, their dreams. Old videos started appearing everywhere. Sweet moments of William and Kate with George, Charlotte, and Louis. 3 beautiful children who had captured hearts across the globe. And then people began to wonder, could there be a fourth? The speculation grew louder, stronger. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something that no one could quite name. Then came the whisper that changed everything. A palace insider, someone who had always been quiet, always been careful, let something slip. Just a few words, spoken softly to a trusted journalist. But those words spread like wildfire through every news outlet on Earth. An announcement was coming, something with emotional meaning, something important. The nation went into a frenzy. What could it mean? When would they know? The questions piled up with no answers in sight. Days passed. The palace remained silent. The royal family continued their duties as if nothing unusual was happening. But everyone could feel it. The electricity in the air, the sense that something magnificent was just around the corner. And then came the night that changed everything. It was late. So late that most of London had gone to sleep. The streets were quiet, and the sky was dark except for the glow of streetlights and the distant stars. But at St. Mary's Hospital, something was happening. A royal car pulled up slowly, its headlights cutting through the darkness. It was quiet, deliberate, almost secretive. The vehicle stopped at a private entrance, away from the main doors where crowds usually gathered. Inside the palace, lights still burned in several windows. Staff members moved through hallways with purpose, their faces serious and focused. Something was happening behind those ancient walls, something the world wasn't supposed to know about yet. Outside the hospital, a handful of photographers and reporters had somehow caught wind of the movement. They gathered in the cold night air, their breath forming clouds in front of their faces. They waited, watched, hoped for a glimpse of something, anything that might tell them what was going on. The night felt impossibly still, like the whole world had paused to listen. The usual sounds of the city seemed muffled, distant. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Palace officials said nothing. No statements were released. No explanations were given. The silence was deafening, and it only made people more desperate to know the truth. Inside the hospital, Kate was there. That much became clear as whispers spread among the waiting press. A private medical visit, they were told, nothing more. But everyone knew that royals didn't make quiet, late-night trips to hospitals for nothing. William was by her side. Of course he was. Where else would he be? Sources said he looked anxious, his jaw tight, his shoulders tense, but he also looked composed, strong, like a man who was ready for whatever was about to happen. The hours crawled by. Reporters stamped their feet against the cold. Cameras stayed trained on the hospital entrance. The world watched and waited, connected through television screens and phone notifications, all wondering the same thing. What was happening inside those walls? Morning came slowly. The sky lightened from black to gray to pale blue. The city began to wake up. People started their commutes, grabbed their coffee, checked their phones. And that's when they saw it. The palace had released a statement. Hearts raced as people opened the notification. Fingers trembled as they read the words. And then joy. Pure, overwhelming joy. A new royal baby was on the way. The announcement spread across the globe in seconds. News anchors could barely contain their excitement as they shared the news. Social media exploded with celebration. People cried. Strangers hugged in the streets. It felt like the whole world had been given the most beautiful gift. But then people read the statement again, and they noticed something. The final line was different, mysterious. It said that a name with special significance would be revealed in due time. What did that mean? Special significance. Those two words sparked a whole new wave of questions. What kind of significance? A family name, a tribute to someone beloved, something connected to history or tradition? The celebrations continued, but now they were mixed with curiosity, with wonder, with a burning need to know what secret meaning this baby's name would carry. Crowds gathered outside the palace, waving flags and holding signs. Tears of happiness rolled down countless faces. Strangers became friends as they shared in the joy of the moment. But underneath all the celebration was something else. A question that wouldn't go away. A mystery that made this moment even more special than anyone had expected. The world began to guess. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had a hope. And as the day went on, one thing became absolutely clear. This wasn't just about a new royal baby. This was about something deeper, something that connected past and present, tradition and change, loss and love. The world wanted to know what that special significance could possibly mean. And somewhere in that hospital, William and Kate held a secret that would soon change everything. When hearts remember, the whole world became detectives overnight. From London to Tokyo, from New York to Sydney, people sat at their computers and phones, searching through history books and royal records. Everyone wanted to be the first to figure it out. Everyone wanted to solve the mystery that William and Kate had left hanging in the air. What name could possibly carry such special significance? In coffee shops and living rooms, strangers debated like old friends. Television shows brought on expert after expert, each one with a different theory. Social media became an endless stream of guesses, hopes, and passionate arguments about what the palace might announce. Some were certain they knew the answer. The late Queen Elizabeth had only recently left them, her absence still a fresh wound in the nation's heart. Surely, they said, the name would honor her. Elizabeth was strong. Elizabeth was timeless. Elizabeth meant everything to the royal family and to Britain itself. People remembered the Queen's gentle smile, her steady presence through decades of change. They remembered how she had held the nation together through hard times and celebrated with them during the good. Naming the baby after her would be perfect, it would be right. But others shook their heads. They had a different name in their hearts, Diana. Even now, all these years later, that name could make people stop in their tracks. Princess Diana had been gone for so long, but she had never really left. She lived on in memories, in photographs, in the way people still spoke about her with tears in their eyes. She had been the people's princess, the woman who changed everything, the mother who had loved her sons with a fierceness that the world had watched and admired. And William had been her little boy, her firstborn, the one who had walked behind her coffin while the world wept. Surely, people whispered, surely William would want to honor his mother. Surely Kate, who had never met Diana, but who seemed to carry her grace, would understand. The baby could be a bridge between past and present, a way of bringing Diana home again. Royal historians threw themselves into research with excitement they hadn't felt in years. They pulled out dusty books and scrolled through ancient family trees. They found patterns, traditions, names that had been passed down through generations like precious jewels. They discovered that royal names often told stories. They connected children to grandparents, to great leaders, to moments in history that should never be forgotten. Every name was a thread in a tapestry that stretched back hundreds of years. The experts appeared on television with their findings, pointing to charts and explaining bloodlines. They spoke about tradition and duty, about how the royals chose names that meant something deeper than just sounding pretty. Each name was a promise, a remembrance, a way of saying that the past mattered, that those who came before would never be forgotten. But William and Kate? They said nothing. They continued their royal duties as if the whole world wasn't holding its breath. They visited schools and hospitals. They attended charity galas and formal dinners. They smiled for the cameras and waved to the crowds. Yet there was something in those smiles, something careful, something that suggested they were holding the most precious secret close to their hearts, not ready to share it yet. Kate glowed at every appearance. Her hand sometimes rested gently on her growing belly, a mother's instinctive gesture of protection and love. William stayed close to her side, his eyes often finding hers across crowded rooms, sharing silent conversations that no one else could hear. When reporters shouted questions about the name, William would just smile, that same gentle, mysterious smile that made everyone even more curious. Kate would look down, her expression soft and knowing, as if she and William shared something beautiful that the world would understand soon enough. The waiting became almost unbearable. Every day brought new theories. Every appearance sparked fresh debate. The nation had turned the guessing into a game, but underneath the fun was something real, a genuine love for this family and a deep desire to understand what connected them all. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a charity event, nothing particularly special. William and Kate were visiting a children's center, one of dozens of visits they made throughout the year. The kids had made drawings and cards, their small hands creating art that the royals would treasure. One little girl, no more than 6 years old, walked up to Kate with a picture. Her voice was sweet and clear as she explained what she had drawn. And then, in that innocent way that children have, she said something that made the room go still. She mentioned the name Diana, just that, just the name spoken by a child who probably didn't understand what it meant to everyone watching. But Kate's reaction, that was what people would talk about for days afterward. Her hand moved to her heart, slowly, instinctively. Her fingers pressed against her chest as if trying to hold something precious inside. Her eyes grew wet with tears that she blinked away quickly, but not before the cameras caught them. William stepped closer to her, his hand finding the small of her back. A gesture of support, of understanding, of shared memory and shared grief and shared love. The moment lasted only seconds, but it felt like the whole world saw something important, something real, something that connected past pain with present joy. Kate smiled at the little girl, her voice gentle as she thanked her for the beautiful picture. But everyone who watched knew they had just witnessed something significant. The name Diana still had power, still had meaning, still could make hearts ache and hope and remember all at once. And suddenly the mystery didn't seem like a mystery anymore. A promise kept in silence. There were nights when William couldn't sleep. He would slip out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Kate, and walk through the dim hallways of their home. His feet knew the path without thinking, past the children's rooms where George, Charlotte, and Louis slept peacefully, past the windows that looked out over gardens bathed in moonlight. He would end up in his study, where memories lived in frames and quiet corners. Those were the nights when his mother felt closest, when he could almost hear her laugh, that bright sound that had filled rooms and made everyone around her feel special. When he could almost feel her hand ruffling his hair the way she used to when he was small. Diana had been everything to him once, his whole world, the person who made scraped knees better with kisses and turned rainy days into adventures. She had broken royal rules to take him and Harry to amusement parks, to homeless shelters, to places where they could see real life beyond palace walls. She had taught him that being royal didn't mean being distant, that crowns and titles didn't matter as much as kindness, that the greatest thing he could ever do was simply care about people, really care with his whole heart. But she had also carried such sadness. Even as a boy, William had sensed it. The way her smile sometimes didn't reach her eyes, the times he heard her crying when she thought no one was listening, the heaviness that seemed to press down on her shoulders even when she was laughing. She had been trapped in ways he was only beginning to understand as an adult, trapped by expectations and cameras and a world that wanted to own her but never really wanted to know her. She had loved fiercely, but she had hurt deeply too. And then she was gone. Just gone. One moment she was there, and the next the world was telling him his mother was never coming home. He had been 15 years old, and suddenly he had to grow up faster than any child should. Now, all these years later, William understood things he couldn't have understood then. He understood loneliness. He understood the weight of duty. He understood how hard it was to live your life while the whole world watched and judged every single move. But he also understood love, real love, the kind his mother had shown him, the kind that didn't care about protocol or proper behavior, the kind that just wrapped its arms around you and held on tight. Kate understood, too, in her own way. She had never met Diana, never heard that famous laugh or received one of those warm hugs that people still talked about decades later. But she had loved William, and loving William meant understanding the ghost that walked beside him, the mother-shaped space in his heart that nothing could ever quite fill. Kate had studied Diana carefully over the years, not just the public Diana that everyone saw in photographs and videos, but the real woman underneath, the mother who had written love notes to her sons, the princess who had held dying patients' hands without fear, the person who had wanted more than anything to be remembered for her compassion. In quiet moments, Kate found herself thinking about what Diana would have wanted, how she would have raised her grandchildren, what she would have whispered to them before bed, what values she would have tried to plant in their hearts. Kate had made a promise to herself, silent but sacred. She would raise George, Charlotte, and Louis the way Diana would have wanted, with love that wasn't afraid to get messy, with compassion that reached beyond palace walls, with the understanding that being royal was about service, not status. She saw Diana's influence everywhere in William. On the way, he knelt down to talk to children at eye level, in how he insisted their kids have normal experiences, school, friends, scraped knees, and ordinary joys, in his gentleness with people who were hurting or lost. Diana lived on in her son, and now, with this new baby coming, Kate and William shared something unspoken between them, a knowledge, a plan, a way to honor the woman who had shaped them both, even though she had left this world so long ago. They talked about it late at night, their voices low and tender. They shared memories and dreams. They cried sometimes because some losses never stop hurting, but they also smiled because love doesn't die. It just changes shape. William told Kate stories she had never heard before, small memories that he kept locked away for moments like these, the silly songs Diana used to sing, the way she smelled like perfume and possibility, how she always knew when he needed a hug without him having to ask. Kate listened and understood. This wasn't just about a name. This was about keeping a light burning, about making sure that George, Charlotte, Louis, and this new baby would know their grandmother not as a sad story or a famous face, but as a real person who had loved with her whole heart. One night after such a conversation, William stood alone in his study. Kate had gone to bed, but he needed a moment more. Just one more moment with his thoughts and his memories. He picked up a photograph from his desk. Diana smiled back at him, young and radiant, her eyes full of life. His finger traced the edge of the frame gently, the way you touch something precious and fragile. The room was silent except for the distant ticking of a clock. William stared at his mother's face, and his lips moved with words meant only for her. "We'll keep your spirit alive," he whispered into the darkness. "I promise. She'll know you through us, through everything we do. You'll never really be gone." The photo couldn't answer. But somehow, in that quiet moment, William felt like she heard him anyway. And somewhere in the palace, plans were being made. Plans that would soon shake the world with their beauty and meaning. Plans that would bring Diana home in the most perfect way possible. Behind closed doors. The palace had never felt quite like this before. Every hallway seemed to hum with energy. Every corner held a secret. And at the center of it all were William and Kate, carrying a truth that felt almost too precious to share with the world. Kate's pregnancy bloomed like springtime. Each week brought new changes, new joys, new moments of wonder. She would rest her hand on her belly and feel the tiny movements inside, and her heart would swell with a love so big it almost hurt. William couldn't stop smiling. His staff noticed it. The way he walked was a little lighter. The way his eyes brightened whenever anyone mentioned the baby. He was like a man carrying sunshine in his pocket, unable to hide the warmth that spread. But beneath all that joy lived something else. A secret. A decision. A name that only a handful of people in the entire world knew. The palace staff had worked with the royal family for years. Some had been there for decades. They knew how to keep secrets. It was part of the job, woven into the very fabric of their service. But this felt different. Only 3 trusted aides had been told. 3 people who had proven their loyalty time and time again. They carried the knowledge like a sacred burden, speaking about it only in whispers behind locked doors. One was Margaret, Kate's private secretary, who had been with her since the beginning. Another was James, William's right hand, a man who had never once betrayed a confidence. The third was Elizabeth, an older woman who had served the royal family since before William was born. They understood what this name meant. They understood why it had to be protected, and they guarded it fiercely, even as the world outside the palace walls grew more desperate to know. Because the pressure was building. Every single day, it grew heavier. Reporters camped outside the gates, their cameras ready for any hint, any clue. Social media exploded with new theories every hour. Royal experts appeared on television, analyzing every tiny gesture, every word, searching for hidden meanings. The public's love had turned into an obsession. Everyone wanted to solve the puzzle. Everyone wanted to be the one who guessed correctly. The name had become more than just a name. It had become a national fixation. Inside the palace, phones rang constantly. Emails flooded in. Letters arrived by the thousands. Some were sweet, filled with suggestions and blessings. Others were demanding, insisting the royals reveal the name immediately. The pressure found its way into every meeting, every conversation. It pressed down on William and Kate like a weight they couldn't shake off. And then the royal advisors got involved. They arrived with their leather folders and serious faces. Men and women who had spent their entire careers understanding royal protocol, tradition, and the delicate balance of public expectation. They sat across from William and Kate in formal rooms, their voices polite but firm. The name must be approved, they said. It must be discussed thoroughly. It must fit within the framework of royal history and tradition. There were rules about these things, expectations, standards that had been maintained for generations. They brought lists of acceptable names. They explained which ones had been used before and which ones would be appropriate now. They talked about popularity polls and public opinion. They reminded William and Kate that their children didn't just belong to them, they belonged to the nation, to the Commonwealth, to history itself. Kate listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever tradition tried to box her in, but she said nothing. Not yet. William's jaw tightened with each word the advisors spoke. He was respectful, he always was, but something in his eyes had changed, hardened, become unmovable. When they finished, silence filled the room like water rising. Then William spoke. His voice was calm but carried a strength that made everyone sit a little straighter. This name would come from the heart, he said, not from a list, not from tradition or polls or public expectation, from the heart, from love, from a place so deep inside him that no advisor or protocol could touch it. His mother had taught him that some things mattered more than rules, that love was more important than tradition, that authenticity meant more than approval. This name was one of those things. Kate reached over and took his hand. Her fingers laced through his, and in that simple gesture the advisors understood. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a decision already made. The meeting ended quietly. The advisors left with their folders, knowing they had lost this particular battle. Some understood, others worried, but all of them recognized that William had spoken not just as a prince, but as a father. And nothing in the world could change a father's mind when it came to protecting what mattered most. That evening, after the palace had grown quiet and most of the staff had gone home, William sat at his desk. A single envelope lay before him, cream-colored and elegant. Inside was a piece of paper with a single name written in careful script. He sealed the envelope slowly, his fingers pressing down the edges with care. Then he wrote on the front in his own hand, "For announcement." For a long moment he simply held it. This envelope contained more than ink on paper. It contained memory and hope, pain and healing, past and future woven together in a way that felt almost magical. He stood and walked to an antique drawer that had been in his family for generations. The wood was dark and smooth from centuries of hands opening and closing it. He pulled it open gently and placed the envelope inside, then closed it with a soft click. The secret was safe. The decision was made. Now they just had to wait for the right moment to share it with the world. But the world wasn't willing to wait much longer. The next morning, the palace gates looked like a festival had arrived. Press vans lined the streets. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder, their microphones ready. Fans had traveled from across the country, some camping overnight, all hoping to catch a glimpse of something important. The energy was electric. Something was about to happen. Everyone could feel it. Then, at precisely 10 in the morning, the Royal Communications Office released a statement. Just one sentence, but it was enough to send shockwaves around the globe. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge will address the nation. Within minutes, every television in Britain was tuned to the same channel. People stopped what they were doing. Workers paused at their desks. Students looked up from their phones. Parents called their children to watch. The world held its breath. William and Kate appeared together on the palace steps. The sunlight caught Kate's hair and made it shine. William stood close beside her, his hand resting gently on her back. They looked calm, composed, but anyone who really looked could see the emotion swimming just beneath the surface. Kate's eyes were bright. William's throat moved as he swallowed. They spoke about love, about family, about the people who had shaped them and the memories that never faded. Their words were simple but carried the weight of everything they felt. Kate talked about building a future while honoring the past, about raising children who understood where they came from, about love that survived even death. William's voice grew thick with emotion as he spoke. He talked about his mother, about her legacy, about promises made in the dark that he intended to keep in the light. Then he paused. The world seemed to stop turning, and he said the words that would change everything. This name carries the soul of our past and the promise of our future. The revelation was coming, and nothing would ever be the same. The moment everything changed. Time seemed to stop. The entire world leaned forward at once, millions of hearts beating in rhythm, waiting for the words that would finally solve the mystery. The palace steps had never felt so important. The morning air had never been so still. William finished speaking and stepped back slightly. His hand found Kate's, their fingers intertwining in a gesture so natural it looked like breathing. Then Kate moved forward, just one small step, but it felt like she was walking into history. Her face glowed with something beyond happiness. It was deeper than joy, richer than pride. It was the look of a mother who was about to share the most precious gift she had ever been given. The cameras captured every detail, the way the breeze moved her hair, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, the slight tremble in her hands that showed she was human, nervous, real. Kate's voice, when she finally spoke, was soft but clear. It carried across the silent crowd like a prayer. She said the name, and the world cracked open. It wasn't just one name, it was a beautiful combination, woven together like threads in a tapestry. Royal tradition lived in those syllables, names that had been carried by kings and queens through centuries of history, names that connected this tiny baby to generations of duty and service. But there was something else, too, something that made people's breath catch in their throats. Diana. There it was, hidden within the name like a jewel, like a promise kept, like a love letter written across time. Not obvious, not demanding, just there, quiet and perfect, exactly where it belonged. Kate explained the meaning with tears shining in her eyes. Each name had been chosen with such care. The first honored tradition, connecting the baby to the long line of royals who had come before. The middle names, there were two, told a different story. One reached back to William's beloved grandmother, the late queen who had guided him through so much. The other, the one that made the crowd gasp and cry, honored Diana. The grandmother this baby would never meet but would carry forward into the future. Kate's voice grew stronger as she spoke about what they hoped for, not just for their child, but for the monarchy itself. They wanted kindness to matter more than protocol. They wanted compassion to be as important as tradition. They wanted their children to remember that crowns were heavy, but love made them lighter. This name was a bridge. It connected the old ways to new dreams. It honored those who had suffered and those who had served. It said that the past mattered, but the future could be different, better, more human. For a heartbeat, the crowd stood frozen, stunned, processing what they had just heard. Then someone started clapping. Just one person, their hands coming together in pure emotion. Then another, then 10 more, then hundreds. Within seconds, the cheering was deafening. People who had waited all morning outside the palace gates burst into tears. Strangers hugged each other like old friends. Flags waved wildly in the air. The sound of celebration rolled through the streets of London like thunder, joyful and unstoppable. A nation falls in love again. The newspapers couldn't print fast enough. Within hours of the announcement, every front page in Britain carried the same story, the same beautiful name, the same photographs of William and Kate on the palace steps, their faces glowing with emotion and pride. But it wasn't just Britain. The entire world had fallen under the spell of this moment. In Paris, the morning papers dedicated entire sections to the story. In New York, the evening news led with it, anchors smiling as they explained the significance to American audiences. In Tokyo, where most people had been asleep when the announcement came, the news greeted them at breakfast, spreading warmth through their morning tea. The headlines were poetry. They spoke of love conquering grief, of tradition embracing change, of a grandmother's spirit living on through a grandchild she would never hold. Royal watchers, those devoted souls who had spent decades following every royal breath, found themselves unexpectedly emotional. These were people who prided themselves on objectivity, on professional distance. But this had broken through their careful walls. One historian, a woman who had written 12 books about the monarchy, appeared on television with tears streaming down her face. She tried to explain the significance, the beauty of what William and Kate had done, but her voice kept breaking. Finally, she just smiled and said it was the most heartfelt choice she had witnessed in 50 years of watching the royal family. Another expert, an older gentleman who usually spoke in measured academic tones, called it brave. Not just touching, but genuinely brave. Because choosing that name meant opening old wounds. It meant acknowledging pain that many people had tried to forget. It meant saying that Diana's loss still mattered, that her memory deserved to be honored, that love was more important than moving on. The comments flooded social media in waves of pure emotion. People shared their stories of where they were when Diana passed away, how they had cried for her, how they had worried about William and Harry, those two young boys walking behind their mother's coffin, how they had hoped over the years that somehow Diana's legacy wouldn't be forgotten. Now, with this name, she was home again, not in body but in spirit, not as a ghost, but as a blessing. Then came the message everyone had been waiting for. The king, William's father, who had his own complicated history with Diana, released a public statement. His words were warm, genuine, filled with a grandfather's pride and a father's love. He spoke about the joy of welcoming a new grandchild, about the strength of family bonds, about how proud he was of William and Kate for honoring the past while building the future. There was no awkwardness in his message, no hint of the pain that history held, just pure, simple love. It was healing in its own way, a different kind of healing than the name itself, but healing nonetheless. People noticed. They commented on how the king's words seemed to close a circle, how he was honoring Diana's memory too, in his own way, how sometimes forgiveness and time could soften even the sharpest edges of the past. But there was another response people were curious about, one that came more quietly but no less significantly. From across the ocean, from the home Harry and Meghan had built in California, came a brief statement. It was private, careful, but warm. They sent their love and congratulations. They spoke about family, about the importance of remembering. The words were few, but they carried weight, because everyone knew the complicated story there too. The distance between the brothers, the hurt that had built up over years, the family fractured by choices and circumstances. This name, this baby, this moment, it was a thread trying to pull them all back together. No one knew if it would work. No one knew if old wounds could truly heal. But at least for today, there was hope. At least for today, the family spoke with one voice of love. The days that followed brought more celebration. Cities lit up buildings in royal colors. Artists painted murals. Musicians wrote songs. The name became part of the national conversation, woven into every discussion about family, love, and legacy. And then came the moment the world had been waiting for, the palace balcony. It was a tradition older than memory. When something important happened, a wedding, a coronation, a birth, the royal family appeared on that famous balcony. They waved to the crowds below, allowing the nation to celebrate with them. The day was perfect. The crowds gathered early, thousands of people pressed together, all craning their necks for a glimpse. Flags waved, children sat on their parents' shoulders. The air buzzed with anticipation. Then the palace doors opened. William stepped out first, handsome in his suit, his smile genuine and warm. Kate followed, radiant, glowing with the kind of beauty that comes from deep happiness. And then the children. George walked with the careful dignity of an older brother who knew the cameras were watching. Charlotte bounced with excitement, unable to contain her joy. Louis waved enthusiastically at everyone and no one in particular, his childish enthusiasm making the crowd laugh with delight. The roar from the crowd was deafening. People cheered until their throats were raw. They cried happy tears. They waved flags so hard their arms ached. This was their royal family. These were their people, and this moment belonged to everyone. William and Kate waved, their free hands moving in those practiced royal gestures, but their eyes kept dropping to the children, to each other, to the tiny life Kate held so carefully. The cameras captured it all, the love on their faces, the way William's hand rested protectively on Kate's back, how Charlotte kept trying to peek at the baby, how George stood a little taller, understanding somehow that this was important. The moment stretched on, perfect and pure. Then slowly the family retreated back inside. The doors closed. The balcony stood empty again, but the image remained. It will be on the front pages tomorrow. It would hang in homes across the nation. It would become one of those photographs that defined an era. That night, after all the celebration had faded, after the crowds had gone home and the cameras had been turned off, William and Kate found themselves alone. The children were asleep. The baby rested peacefully in the nursery. The palace had finally grown quiet after days of controlled chaos. They sat together in their private sitting room, tea growing cold on the table between them. Neither spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. Some moments were too big for words. Finally, Kate broke the silence. Her voice was soft, almost wondering. She talked about what the name meant, not just to them, but to everyone who had celebrated, to the nation that had embraced it so completely, to the next generation of royals who would grow up knowing that honesty and emotion had a place alongside tradition. William listened, his eyes distant but warm. Then he spoke about his children, about what he wanted for them, what he hoped they would become. He promised there in that quiet room that he would raise them the way his mother had tried to raise him, with honesty, with warmth, with humility. He would teach them that their titles were tools for service, not symbols of superiority, that kindness mattered more than protocol, that love was the most important lesson of all. Kate reached for his hand. Her smile was tender, understanding. She told him that this name, this beautiful, meaningful name, had done something neither of them had expected. It had brought healing, not just to their family, though yes, that too, but to the whole nation, to everyone who had loved Diana and grieved her loss, to people who had wondered if the royal family could change, could feel, could honor the messy, complicated, beautiful truth of their history. This name was a bridge, a promise, a beginning. William pulled Kate close. They sat like that for a while, holding each other in the darkness, thinking about the future they were building for their children. Outside, the kingdom slept peacefully. Tomorrow would bring new headlines, new celebrations, new moments to treasure. But tonight was just for them. But they would learn. In time, they would understand. Because some names fade with time, forgotten in the march of history. But this one would live forever in the heart of the kingdom, a name born from grief and carried into joy, a name that proves love never really dies. It just keeps growing, generation after generation, forever and always.